Hello, darling. How are you?
I'm bearing up. I'm not so bad.
Morning, Simon.
Excited.
We
Okay.
see you, Gail.
Okay, so Bevan does not
Very
have.
good.
When I spoke to Bevan before, he did not have his camera on, so this really is going to be like a radio chat show, and I'm your disc jockey. So I'll give a little intro and remember to identify where you're from and uh, chat away. Ah, there we go. Bevan? Bevan? Okay, he's come on.
Hello. Hello.
Bevan?
Yes.
Hi, it's Susan calling
Hello
from
again,
Brooklyn.
Susan.
Calling from Brooklyn. How are
All the way
you?
across the. Oh, I'm fine. All the way across the world.
It really is, but um, everybody has a connection to Brooklyn in some way, shape, or form. And now you have a real personal connection.
I have. I've seen it in so many fictional incarnations in movies and TV shows. It sort of seems to be almost in my blood anyway, just from my absorption in popular culture.
I am a transplant. I grew up in Boston and then lived in Los Angeles for many years, and I go back very often, but I am now ensconced in Brooklyn. Well, let me introduce you to your fans who are on today. Everyone,
The word fans makes me blush, but that's okay.
oh, come on.
It's okay, we can't see.
Um, uh, we are, as I told you, this is Skype limits the number of people that we can have on the chat. So
Yes.
this is being recorded so that the 850 international fans who are part of our Facebook page, who are eagerly awaiting to hear what you have to say, will get to have their questions answered.
How lovely.
Okay, so we have Amy Tatum Bannister, who is a co-administrator, and she comes from Massachusetts.
Hello, Amy.
Dr. Donna Devine from Connecticut.
Ah,
Simon Collins from London.
Simon.
Fran
Oh, yes.
Simmons from London.
Fran.
David Bowles, who's our techie for tonight from Australia. And
Techie
Gail,
David.
Gail Siegel from Jerusalem.
Gail, hello.
Hello.
So, Bevan, before I turn it over to questions,
Yes.
I want to tell you a little bit about the Place to Call Home fans and who we are and how we operate.
Yes.
The page was originally started at the urging of Peter Vernon, who has collected over 6,000 fans on the main Australia page and was largely responsible for collecting those many petitions and signatures to Seven to get another season of A Place to Call Home. At his urging, I started an international page. Actually, I started an American page with the hopes that maybe we would get 100 people who were seeing the series either on Acorn or on some PBS stations. It quickly grew, and people started contacting us from all over the world. Um, Gail and Simon and Donna and so many other people. We now have people from 17 countries and 31 out of the 50 states.
Wow.
Our chatters, our members are wonderful. They are very devoted to the series, but they're also extremely devoted to the many issues that have come to deep and animated discussion. Issues of the Holocaust, the issue of homosexuality, class distinction, racism. And our conversations are deep and meaningful. And I'm very proud to say that I think we have the most intelligent, best fan page on Facebook.
Great.
Here, here.
There's a lot of discussion about you because we all know that a series like this is only as good as the creator and the writer. So I'm going to start calling on people, and we'll start the discussion. I want to start with Dr. Donna Devine. Donna, tell Bevan what you do and how you came to A Place to Call Home, and why you are such a devoted fan.
I'm a retired professor from Smith College, where for 40 years I taught political theory and Middle East politics, and have watched some TV, but for the most part, I'm not really up on most of American culture, as my children would put it. I saw an episode of A Place to Call Home quite by accident, very late at night on Connecticut public TV, and I was sold. I think the comparison to Downton Abbey is not. It's not exact, because I think A Place to Call Home engages far more seriously with social issues than Downton. Downton was about money and how to save a large house. So I've been very impressed with the kind of discussions that go on the fan page, and when I'm not reading about ISIS and writing about ISIS, I turn to this page. So I'm really interested in hearing how you dealt with some of the issues of social change, because you have the issue of homosexuality with James, but he also expresses very traditional patriarchal attitudes towards marriage, towards his wife, and what his expectations. The same with Carolyn. She's avant-garde in some ways and very traditional in others. And neither has a language to explain, a sort of conceptual language to explain their differences. So I was wondering how you dealt with all of that.
Yeah. I think the show, apart from the fact that I wanted to actually embrace the form of melodrama, which I feel many people use the term pejoratively, and I actually think that melodrama is if well done, is a valid form, and equally as valid as many other forms. And so my original intention was that I wanted to actually visit and embrace melodrama in very much in the way melodrama was embraced in the 50s itself, as a form of entertainment, and then within that to give it some more substance than simply I don't know, Jane Wyman going blind and Rock Hudson operating to make her see. I mean, I wanted to perhaps use it as a prism, a lens through which modern day audiences could look back. Hopefully younger people might look back and see as things were then, and then compare it to as things are now. So, for example, a young homosexual now might not really take for granted the advances that have taken place and not really know the journey through which they came. And as you very perceptively pointed out, that so many things now that have a name and that can be spoken of, once then you actually didn't even have a language to speak of it. I forget who it was, maybe Gore Vidal, somebody who once said that the love that dared not speak its name is now the love that simply won't shut up. There was a time where you simply couldn't talk about such issues as homosexuality. If anything, I think on the show on that thing, people are so that it can be embraced by the audience. We probably have people speak about it more openly than they would have back then. It was something that was brushed under the carpet. Equally, in terms of racism, we have a big issue in this country, as many countries do, but in the country we have a big issue with boat people, refugees. And there's a lot of far right-wing hostility towards certain issues and certain races. And I guess I wanted to go back there and look at racism using anti-Semitism because overall these days there's certainly still anti-Semitism in Australia, but it's mild compared to how it was back then. So I chose the anti-Semitism as an example to use from back then that people could see and go, gosh, did people actually act that way back then towards Jewish people? Did people actually act that way back then towards homosexuals? Did people, actually act that way back then towards women? For example, the whole issue of Caroline and the child and the shame of the child and the things that people often did, like going overseas and bearing the child overseas and coming back with it claimed by another as their child, etc. So that's sort of where I really just started my concept of the show, as an entertainment, because I think that I'm a great believer in wrapping one's message up in a palatable morsel. So I wanted to make it an entertainment, a melodrama, to reflect the forms, and within that, like Mary Poppins, A Spoonful of Sugar, put those things. And nothing delights me more than when you read on some site a young person saying, for example, when we gave James the electroshock therapy, oh my God, did they treat people like that back then? So that we actually do make people, we can only learn from history if we remember that history happened. And so that was basically my raison d'etre for the show.
Bevan,
That's it. Yep.
The only other series of yours that I was able to find here was Packed to the Rafters,
Yes.
which I thoroughly enjoyed, but was not high on the social, did not really address societal issues. I mean, you did deal with a aging parent and, perhaps a Greek mother not wanting her son to marry, out of the circle. But you are so politically and socially conscious. Did you create a place to call home with an eye towards dealing with these issues?
Yeah, look, I think Rafters was my confection. Yes, even within the confection there were certain little nuggets of social comment, but overall Rafters was a fairy tale of suburbia. It was designed specifically to say to people in a dark world that, yeah, it's a dark world, but if people love each other enough, then certain things can be overcome. I didn't deal with huge issues because I created at a time when there was a lot of dark and nihilistic television, a lot of real life recreations of criminal activity. A series called Underbelly was very popular and it was very well done. It was very dark. It was the central characters were criminal, and to a certain extent, unfortunately, like Breaking Bad, the criminal characters in it became slightly alarmingly popular with the audience, and for some people almost aspirational, and it was very well done. And because it was very well done, it grabbed the public imagination. But at that time, I was thinking, it would be nice to turn the television on and just say to people for an hour each week that, yeah, it's a dark world, but in the dark world, don't forget there is love. And so Packed to the Rafters was created as a confection, as a whimsy, and it was deliberately created to extol, perhaps with the pendulum going in the other direction, the virtues of love and support and affection, as distinct from the rather dark and nihilistic textures of these other shows. I think A Place to Call Home was almost my creative reaction to that, because I had sort of done these seasons of extremely, it's probably my most popular show, extremely popular flummery, and I don't use the term flummery as to put it down. It was just as the creator of a dessert can create a very rich and dense cake, they can also create a very light on the palate mousse or something. And so that was my life on the palate mousse. After it creatively I wanted to perhaps use my time to say equally so, because I'm sort of incapable of, I think, of creating something that doesn't actually say, no matter how dark it is, within the human condition. And I think that's how I got Sarah to have had been in the camps. I wanted to say, to take a lead character and go, this woman had been taken to one of the darkest places possible in the history of mankind, and she had come through it, and she'd come through the horrors and the tortures of it, and she'd come out of it still, when we met her on that boat at the beginning of the series, closed and damaged and self-protective. But I wanted to see her journey out into the light, informed by that which she had experienced within the dark. And so I think that whole thing, the genesis of all of that, I think came from the flummery that I had spent a number of my years doing before, and hopefully attesting as much in its own rich, dense cake way to the strength and positivity that can be in the human condition, no matter how dark as the other one did in its sort of like moose sort of way.
Okay. Let's hear from Gail Siegel, who's in the beautiful, wonderful city of Jerusalem. Gail, let's hear from you.
Boker Tov, Bevan, and Shalom
Gail.
from Jerusalem.
Thank you.
I understand that you had the opportunity to visit Israel a while back.
I did.
And you saw places like the Dead Sea and Tel Aviv, and of course Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, when you left Israel, what experiences did you take home with you to help you inspire you to write about Sarah and Renee Nortman? And what can we expect in the future? Will we see more of the rich Jewish traditions in a place to call home?
I think the one experience I took, historical one that I went away with, that affected me very strongly, and then one that was just social. And they're sort of odd little things that stuck him up. But first of all, going to Masada, which, apart from being geographically extraordinarily spectacular, just to stand in that place and to know what had taken place there in terms of the group of people who had been there facing an outside power and who had embraced the extremely final and rash acts from their commitment to their nation and their faith that those people did in that place, had a very powerful effect on me. Mm-hmm. And also the other one, which was really just charming, because to me it actually said so many things about what Israel speaks of, was by the Dead Sea, that because the water has retreated so much, you've got to take that big trek to get to the water's edge. And I was there with my friends, and there were these very lovely older people there. That sort of that thing that comes with age, where you just look at the wonderful worn lines that speak of so much experience, and you don't like to say, my God, if you could just tell me what you'd seen, but that if they did tell you what they'd seen, you'd hear amazing tales. And then at the same time, across the sort of like the muddy flats towards the edge of the water, came this tractor with three things behind it, full of young, vibrant, alive, incredibly physically beautiful young people. I don't know, they must have been some sort of youth group, or I don't know whether it was anything with military training or whatever. I have no idea. But they glowed with joy and youth and optimism. And I looked at these older people, and I looked at the joy and the youth and optimism, and I don't know, it hit me in this incredible, that it was this state built on the ages, and it was this state built on the youth and the optimism of a tomorrow. And I think that both distilled them in front of me, and as well as both groups then went to the edge of the mud and smeared themselves with the mud, which of course is full of these amazing minerals, which are then extended the metaphor to the very earth itself, bringing rejuvenation and richness into the skin and the body of the people who smear it over. And so I sort of stood there and went, I'm in the middle of this sort of like palpably living metaphor. And I took that, it's very strange, I took that away, that one image I took away just about more than anything else, and that sat with me very strongly. And I think in juxtaposition at the same day of having been onto Masada Rock, which spoke of the sacrifice, it in its own individual horrible sacrifice that it was, spoke of the many sacrifices of ages and the sacrifice against a force, an invading force, coming up that ever further up that ramp to come into the fortress on the rock. That in itself spoke of a current day metaphor. So yeah.
Bevan, one of the things that I am so impressed with about A Place to Call Home is the authenticity with which the Jewish experience is portrayed. I've been in the world of television and film for over 30 years, and every time a television show, be it a comedy or a drama, whatever, tries to capture the Jewish experience, I sit back and say, what are these people thinking? It has nothing to do with reality. A Place to Call Home has portrayed what it means to be a Jew the most authentically that I have seen anywhere. Sarah's experience when she goes to the mikveh, when she lights candles for Shabbat, when she goes before Yom Kippur and asks people for forgiveness, the scenes surrounding Renee's death and the Kaddish and the strangers who come to participate in the mitzvah of comforting the grieving.
Yep.
How were you able to accomplish this so magnificently?
Well, I think having decided to do it, I just felt that there was a duty to do it as accurately as possible. I have to tell you that with the funeral, I cannot tell you the discussions that took place on budget of can we afford the 9 men, the men that came. It's those sort of little things. And once again, it was like, well, you bite the bullet. Yes, it's going to cost us some money, but we got to pay that money so that we do it properly. Look, it was just a thing that we have some lovely, some marvelous people here who are very good and in offering their advice and suggestion in making sure everything is correct. And I think it's just having embraced it, just feeling a sense of obligation that you do it as right as possible. I had to smile. There was somebody on I think it was Amazon who, and I think this sort of annoyance can only come from a liking of something, I guess. Somebody got very annoyed that we had Sarah saying something in a way that, coming from France, she would have said it differently to somebody who might say it in Australia and stuff like that. And so every now and then you go, even though we work really, really hard to get things right, sometimes that, as you know, is often the case with the passage of years, or different cultures, attitudes to things you might get wrong. But we in everything like that, we set out with the best will in the world to do it as well as we can, because I just think because it's an experience that's been, I think we're very aware too, because it was an experience that had not really been explored much on Australian television, except for a wonderful Australian television series from some decades ago called Palace of Dreams that a lady called Sandra Levy did, based upon her family. That was really the only other Australian television show that I can think of that had any form of appreciable recognition and addressing of the Jewish experience. So, yeah, when these things come so rarely, one feels a duty of care not to be cavalier in the realization of it, and we try our hardest, hoping against hope that we do get it right. So it's very it makes me feel really good that you have reacted like that. Yeah.
It's been portrayed so wonderfully that I have some Jewish religious friends who would never in a million years think to sit down and watch a series, who are now, when I tease them with how wonderfully Judaism was portrayed, have now become also addicted to this series because they so personally relate to how Sarah and Renee are portrayed. So you've done a really marvelous job with it.
Thank you. In all of the issues, I mean, with the homosexuality too, it was terribly important to me. Like when we did the putting James into the hospital, and he actually puts himself in because he so has come to hate himself that he basically wants to burn the truth of himself out of himself. There was a feeling at that point, with some people who felt that it mightn't be a good idea to go into it as deeply as we did, because it was he was actually in the hospital for the first 4 episodes of the second season. Mm-hmm. He's only taken out in the 4th episode, and there was a feeling of, I guess, by some people who might have felt a little bit more commercial drama minded. Well, can't we sort of just get him out and get him in an episode? And just as I felt with the Jewish matters, that my feeling there was a great responsibility to all those men who did back then face some of the horrors that James did, and many of them did, and even more so through to some of them being lobotomized. I felt that there was a responsibility to deal with that issue as once again as strongly and as savagely as it was, and to deal with it in truth. So yeah, it doesn't really, with all of it, the Jewish issue, the homosexual issue, the racial issue, the issue of class, which probably is a more benign one compared to, because I guess issues of class are more familiar to people. But I sort of want to, it's one of the reasons. I'll say, I will share with you that one of the things that's really annoyed me is the degree to which the show's actually been compared to Downton Abbey. So I was glad that when you said up front you felt there was a difference, because I just think it's sort of like a lazy comparison in the sense that yes, it's got Downton Abbey has a really big house and we have a not so big house, and Downton Abbey is about a house and the change, a societal change that puts the house at risk, whereas in ours the house isn't at all at risk. Attitudes are, I guess, being challenged, and you sort of have two sort of rather strong matriarchs, one of whom overall, I mean, I think the Maggie Smith matriarch, beautifully played by her, is overall an almost comic figure. She's actually quite benign in the sense that she doesn't actually have any particular power base, and she tends to be the sort of like the one who makes everybody cock their eyebrows and sort of ignore what she says. And Noni does this wonderful job of this incredibly strong matriarch who really does have the power base within the household. And so for me, when people compared it to Downton Abbey, I'd sort of think, oh, really? Can't we just dig a bit deeper? So I have to be honest and say, any critic who has gone, another Downton Abbey, I've just gone, well, you're a lazy critic. So anyway, I've got that one off my chest.
I don't think you'll find any disagreement from any of us. I cringe when they make that comparison, and I think that some of it comes from the fact that Downton received such incredible ratings and became such a worldwide hit that they're thinking, can another show duplicate that? I don't think that anybody who is a really good viewer who watches both shows can compare them at all.
No, and look, and that's not saying, because I mean, goodness me, I mean, I watched Downton Abbey and I really like Downton Abbey, and I'm not sort of saying I don't want the comparison, because it's very flattering in one sense, because Downton's a very, very good show, but it just sort of seems to me a sort of a facile comparison.
Um, Bevan, before I ask someone else, you mentioned Noni.
Yes.
We all love, love, love. Um, did you have her in mind? And can you tell us a little bit about the casting process for the principals?
Yeah, Noni came in really from left. I had a much different image in my head of what Elizabeth was like and how she carried herself and how she and just her whole manner. And we were having all these women come in who were doing these auditions, and none of them, they all came in with sort of like air that I felt was right and I'd seen in my head as I created her, but somehow or other it wasn't hitting. And then Noni came in, and I don't know if you've seen Mel Brooks' Producers, you know, and where we had that wonderful moment, you know, where that's our Hitler. But you know, it was a that's our Hitler moment in the sense that she just came in and she did something completely different to what I had seen with the material, and suddenly Elizabeth was there. It was just one of those extraordinarily revelatory moments. I think we probably pretended that we weren't as excited so that it wouldn't sort of cruel the deal with her. You know, if you show too much excitement to actors, then you put yourself on the back foot in terms of doing the deal to get them on board. But you know, at the moment, the minute I saw her audition, I was just like, it was like a supernova going off, and I just knew it couldn't be anybody else. And of course, and that's one of those wonderful things where, you know, suddenly an actor comes in and in one deft moment of their interpretation of the text you've written completely supplant every previous image you actually had of the character, and that's deliciously revelatory. And then she just went on, of course, to take it from greater to greater. I mean, you know, she can do no wrong in my eyes.
I think you'll find us all in agreement with that.
Yeah.
And what about the casting of Sarah Adams?
Sarah, it was interesting. I couldn't see anyone. When Marta came in, quite the opposite of what it was with Noni. When Marta came in, she was absolutely accurate, but she was completely what I had seen in my head. So it was the same eureka moment, but she was completely what I'd seen in my head. If everybody, because casting is a collaborative process, there were some of the people, I think, who had seen her as dark in colouring, and so there were some people who, you know, didn't somehow physically the physical. And the thing about Marta is she has this incredible contained and controlled and this surface that and some a few of the people with the casting had wanted, I guess, it to be more out there, but my point was, this is a woman who has created, this is why I loved it, this is why when I saw her it was like, oh my God, yes, this is a woman who's created this wall around herself, and the journey of the show is her journey out beyond that wall, and then slowly having come beyond that wall, turning around and brick by brick, psychologically and emotionally dismantling it and be able to engage directly with the world. So for me, there was never any question that and it's interesting, isn't it? You know, because I've always said the show is a love story between two women. I mean, of course, a platonic love story. I always said from day one, you think it's a sort of like it's a bodice it's a show that's wrapped up in this sort of seeming like romantic novel identity, but it almost subverts it in the sense that you think it's a story of a love affair between Sarah and George, but it's not. The show's actually about the love affair between Sarah and Elizabeth. It's about two women falling into deep friendship. That's what the show's about.
Interesting.
And it's not about, yes, there, of course, in the traditional sense, you've got George and Sarah. But if you look at where that went, it didn't go anywhere. I mean, the minute they're about to marry, back comes her husband. And I had a huge fight at that point with a lot of people saying, how can she say the love of my life is back? George is the love of her life. And I said, no, he's not. She's only known George for 6 months. This is the man she survived the camps for. Of course he's the love of her life. George is a byroad, a greatly loved byroad on the main highway of her relationship with Renee. And when he comes back, as George says to her, you know, when he says to her, he doesn't even try and fight for her. He says, because the woman that you are that made me love you, I know can do no other than what you're doing, and that is go back to the man, this man. And that's why George never even attempts to fight for her, because he knows it is an undignified, unloving and pointless exercise, because she is who she is. Now that is a really untraditional romantic novel love affair, because when the other man comes, the central male-female love affair is marginalised, whereas the central female friendship affair, I guess if you want for a better term, but it is a love affair, it's the love of friendship. And if you watch the show, it is about those two women falling more and more into friend. And that is the centre of the show. Equally so, the young male lead, the man, once again, this is the subversion of the show. You put out David Berry, you know, and David was certainly hit with the pretty stick at birth. You know, and you know, David's an extremely handsome young man.
We love him.
And he's wonderful. And you put him there, but what do? You know, I subvert it by the most handsome man in the show is a tortured homosexual. And so this is what I set out to do, was really take all of the tropes of traditional romantic fiction and subvert them. Now, the interesting thing I've found, and I don't know if any of you have found it over time, is I get a lot of people. I remember being on a panel, because I'm the sweetest thing in the world unless somebody actually gets up my nose, and then I turn. And so I'm on this panel, and this man said something like, oh, well, blah, 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 and that sort of, you know, shallow commercial stuff like Channel 7 does, like Packed to the Rafters and A Place to Call Home. And I was on the panel, and I said, just a minute, okay. So you're saying a show about a lapsed Catholic Jewish convert who survived Ravensbrück concentration camp, comes back to Australia, saves a tortured closet homosexual from committing suicide aboard a liner, and then finds herself at odds with a privileged family, and by her relationship with them forces them to face the growing anachronism of their values in a modern world, that's a sort of a light and trivial show. He looked at me, and I knew in that moment that I had him. And I said, you've never seen my show. And there was this dead silence in the hall. And I said, I don't mind you criticising my shows if you want, but I expect you at least to criticise them or make your value on them having seen them. Now, the interesting thing is, I think this happens a lot with this show. There are a lot of people who I've heard say things against it, or, you know, or be dismissive of it, because in fact they hear its basic premise and they assume that it is simply a Mills and Boon romance. And so you get this very interesting thing, and I don't know if any of you have come across it, where people actually have formed a value judgment on the show without ever watching it. And the value judgment is because they never come to see that the form that I set out to subvert is subverted within the show, and that they take it to be simply a Mills and Boon piece without actually sampling it. And so I found that a quite interesting thing over the time. And so I guess the lesson in that is, if you're going to sort of like take a form and subvert it, maybe tell people up front, I don't know, not wait for them to come and sample it.
Let's hear from Amy. Amy is outside of beautiful Boston, my hometown. And Bevan, she's also one of my very able co-administrators who has really helped take it to another level. She coordinates our Instagram account so that we can get the word out to a lot of other people. And we're really lucky to have her. So, Amy, say hello to Bevan.
Hello, Amy.
Hi. I think I probably have one of the conversations that people get into that really actually I end up jumping in on. I think people will notice the comment section is about Regina.
Yes.
In the beginning, I kind of loved to hate Elizabeth Bly a little bit. And as their relationship kind of changed and grew, I started obviously loving her, and then Regina kind of took center stage with that. There doesn't have to be a good reason why somebody behaves the way that she does. I get that, but I can't help but think that there must be something more to her background that's making her the way she is. So she's become a very intriguing character to me.
Yeah, Regina's a psychopath. And I mean, I think Regina came because I had a friend who had been incredibly damaged by forming a relationship with a functioning psychopath, and I think it's an increasing and growing problem in our society. As people are, I think, becoming increasingly narcissistic, self-absorbed, especially in this day of social media, etc., where they're all stars in their own soap opera, that we are forming an unempathetic, sociopathic, in some cases, borderline psychopathic society. I believe it's what's behind a lot of the rising domestic abuse. And I wanted in a character to reflect the person who had basically destroyed my friend. And I wanted to have a character where their empathy was pretty much at zero, and who was full of the classic traits of psychopaths, where everything's fine until things go wrong, and then they are the victim, it's poor me. The classic psychopath wanting to feel superior and wanting to find a group that they can feel superior to. And I wanted also somebody in the show who, in their own small way, represented the national psychology of Nazi Germany. So Regina is basically the psychopathy of Nazi Germany. It is the sort of thing that that enabled Nazi Germany to exist. In other words, for example, her background, that she was at 15, and this man walked into her home, and she said, in her own childish, selfish, self-absorbed way, that is what I want. That's the husband I want. And she was 2 years too young, and her sister got him. And from that day on, everything that went wrong wouldn't have gone wrong if she just got George. That became her absorption and her obsession. She had a second-rate marriage with a second-rate physical life, where she played the perfect diplomat's wife, but it was empty and meaningless, and every time she had second-rate sex with her husband. She probably thought it would have been first-rate with George. When she didn't have children, she thought if I'd been with George, I would have had my own wonderful children. And basically the mantra, if I had just had George, became her all-purpose explanation to how anything that was wrong could be right. And she, and on a purely technical level, a character like Elizabeth, who's as strong and as multi-textured as Noni can bring to it, becomes dull if she's playing the same note. And so I brought Regina in to basically, I guess, have her start to grow, the character of Elizabeth start to grow by being hoisted on the petard of her own miscalculation that she could control the tiger she brought into the household. And I knew that without Regina, without seeing something of the darkness in herself reflected in the pure blackness of Regina, Elizabeth probably would never have started the journey of growth and redemption and maturation she did. Now, it's interesting, I think, that a lot of the nations after the war were very happy to go, look at those Nazis. They represent everything that's black and evil and terrible, and we have nothing to do with them. I think the world started to, like Elizabeth, go on a journey of maturation when they stopped just saying that they were the other and said they were the other, but what in them must we beware of in ourself? What is the point to mankind to have the monstrosity that took place between 39 and 45 with that country? What is the point? If at some point people don't stand back for a minute and look and say, therein must be lessons we take for ourselves, because if we just keep them as the other, then there is no lesson to be learned from them. All there is to be horror to be gleaned from. And so, to me, that's so Regina took that sort of symbolic place in the landscape of the show, apart from which she's fabulously camp.
She is. I reckon if I understood her, I probably wouldn't see the problem with her, I guess. So,
I mean, the interesting thing is with my friend who was destroyed by this woman. She came into his life and she took a really healthy, psychologically together, decent person, and she basically, like all psychopaths, went in, love bombed him, and it happens with women too equally, which is with a lot of abuse situations. She love bombed him. She created the web around him, and then she set around destroying him. And it's a pattern with psychopaths. And you look at them and you go, you don't know why. That is the psychopathic pattern. And equally so, it's as I say, it's why these men come into women's lives and they form this incredibly powerful bond about him. When people say, oh, but why doesn't she leave him? If he's being so awful to her, why doesn't she leave him? The question is because she can't, because he's created this psychopath's bond around her that keeps her in his thrall, that keeps her in his financial thrall, that takes a strong woman and attacks her central core and diminishes her so that she doesn't dare leave him because he's convinced her that she has no worth away from him, etc., and so forth. And so, having watched an incredibly good friend of mine destroyed by one of these people, and trust me, there are more and more out there all day in the world. It's a growing social problem as empathy leaches out of our society. And so to me, I wanted to actually represent somebody like that, and for people, and the thing about them is that they are incredibly plausible. People say to me, why don't people why don't people wake up to Regina? My point is because the world is not the viewers. The viewers see the truth because they're given the prism as viewers to see her actions. But if you actually look at the actions that you, the viewers, see, and you look at the actions that the world see, you look at what the world would see, which is the veneer she presents, the smile she presents, the incredible social facility she has. The world doesn't have the information that the viewers have, and so the world is full of these people who present this incredibly plausible, charming, wonderful mask on the surface. But because the world doesn't have the viewer's standpoint, they often get away with it. Politicians often get away with it.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. How did this funny little man with a funny little moustache you watch those parades, you watch them all, the hysterical fervour, and you go, are you seeing something different to this ridiculous, funny little man that I'm seeing on this newsreel footage as he drives down Berlin-Alexanderplatz? I don't get it, but they did, you know what I mean? And the German people, once again, as with Regina, people say, how come people fall for Regina? Afterwards they said, but we didn't know what was going on. Well, how could we respond? Because we didn't know that's what was happening over the wire fence. Well, equally so, that's what I think is in with Regina. The world doesn't know what's happening over Regina's wire fence. To take the huge situation, diminish it. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to show the danger of the plausibility of charm in tricking people, and so she's just a huge representative, I think, of any form of thing like which to its extreme, taken to its extreme, was what Nazism was in Germany. Yeah,
She does it well.
Before we hear from Fran in London, I do want to tell you that the consensus of opinion is that we want Elizabeth to maintain her edge, but we really want her to have a passionate love affair, get some good sex, get some real loving, and whether it's her current, we don't know what's going to happen, and we're not going to put you in the position but we really want it to happen.
Well, let's just say, if you probably I would say anything that you want, that you as fans of the show are feeling as desirable things, probably my instincts have led me to feel similarly, and so I suspect that in some way, shape, or form, without giving anything away, because spoilers are exactly that, they spoil. Let's just say that I think certain things will be occurring that won't disappoint you.
So good to hear. France.
But I won't say but a while I'll say is, your instincts as fans and probably my instincts as creator are within the same spectrum, and they mightn't actually congeal in the same way, but I think they will congeal within a spectrum of hope and expectations that you guys have.
Excellent. Okay, let's hear from Fran Simmons, who's in London.
I'm actually on the south coast of the United Kingdom, in Sussex. Hi, Bevan.
Hello there, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. My question is about the characters and the pace of the storylines. Have you already written the characters' storylines from start to finish, so you know where they are actually going to be at the end of the series, at the end of the story, or are their storylines susceptible to change dependent on other factors, other people joining the series as the series develops? Do storylines, characters, stories change?
Well, yeah, they do. Like, I always saw it as a 3-season show, and when it was on 7, I sort of had a very, very clear view of what its 3-season incarnation was going to be. We wrote that ending and we wrote and shot the two endings of season 2. To be honest, that first ending that went to air, which was the end ending, was it was pretty bloody dreadful. Excuse my French, but because to be honest, we never imagined that it was not going to go on. So when there was thing hypothesized of, well, look, let's just do this thing that in case it doesn't go on, we can put it to air. I've got to be honest and say it was not done with any form of verve. It was done pretty cavalierly. Because none of us really imagined it would ever be used. We shot what we always felt, and we shot it at the time, and I had worked out where the story was going to go after that. Which was the ending with Renee being shot. With George being shot. And then we did this other version. And then, of course, it didn't go ahead to our surprise. And so that sort of one went to air. So that thing, and I can call it a thing, that thing that went to air that finished on 7 was just, it was almost like your child had been taken and cut off at the knees. So I'd always had a vision of it being a 3-season show, and I knew exactly where it was going to finish at the end of 3 seasons. What happened then, of course, was it did go on and went to Foxtel, and they said, well, let's pick it up with the original cliffhanger. I had decided to take a year off writing because I was so exhausted, and I was going to be able to fit in the 3rd season on Channel 7 before I went. Because of the delay, I then had the dilemma of whether I would actually be actively involved in the 3rd season or just pass my plotting notes over to somebody else and not be involved. And I really just knew I needed that break. So I passed that over to Susan Bauer, who took it over and worked very, very hard. And so the interesting thing was that Susan took my notes, and I said to Susan when I handed them across, look, these are just for you to use as springboards and inspiration because, you will bring your own stuff into it. What's been interesting for me coming back and doing season 4 was then Susan did stuff in season 3 that my imagination wouldn't have come up with. And so then I came back on board to dovetail into some of her inspiration and take it on. So I sort of had changes of direction, in some cases deliciously imposed upon me, including, my God, she's drunk the poison already. What the hell do I do about that? And so that forced change on me, and it's forced some really interesting change, and has led. And then I also knew that Foxtel may want it to go for. I always felt 7 really only probably felt that they wanted it for a 3-year life. So Foxtel, though, I have a feeling. Hopefully, don't know yet, but we feel it will go on. And so I had to be thinking of into the, as far into the, maybe along much further into the future than I had imagined. So those sort of things obviously shape your changes. Who may or may not choose, given this world of rushing off to Hollywood and becoming stars, who may or may not choose to be there for the next season, with contract renegotiation, those sorts of things make changes to your creativity. My degree's in pure mathematics, and so I find that very useful to me in that form of creativity because it's dealing with infinite variables, and so I've got a pretty good mind to deal with those changes. But that being said, even then, and I don't want to sound too spooky in saying this, but it's sort of the best way I can describe it. There's my world, and then there's the world of the show. And when I get into it far enough, I stop telling the world of the show what to do. It tells me what to do. I sort of become the conduit. I become the medium between it. I become the entry point between it and this world. Now, I know that sounds spooky, and I don't want you to think I'm crazy, but sometimes I am convinced, absolutely, I know where it's going, and I'm going type, and my fingers suddenly start doing this other thing entirely. And it's as though Sarah's told me what's going to happen, or Regina's told me what's going to happen, or Elizabeth's, And so, there's a, and I guess every creative person has something like that where that which you're creating somehow takes you over, and that happens too. And sometimes a couple of big changes. There's one in terms of I won't go into it in any spoiling detail, but there's one in terms of Elizabeth not losing her edge in episode 4 of season 4, and I'm writing away, and suddenly Elizabeth does this thing, and it is just extraordinarily outrageous, and it is so right. And I can't imagine that fans of the show aren't going to leap to their feet screaming, "Yay!" But I had no idea until she did it she was going to do it.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Because suddenly she told me she was going to do it. So, yeah, so between the logistics and between the world itself taking its own decisions, and once again, I'm not crazy, it's just that's how it happens. Things do change, and that's sort of the delicious thrill of the process. If it was yes, I have it mapped out, but it's wonderful when it rebels against me and changes the landscape.
Bevan, we would be very disappointed to find out that you did not have a streak of crazy in you.
Well, okay. Oh, good. I'm glad because I sort of do.
As a matter of fact, when we were talking about you, and Simon, who you're going to hear from in a minute, did this wonderful post inviting people to ask questions, he and I had a private conversation, and he said, I don't think that Bevan is on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And we decided we had this image of you in a dark room with a Selectric typewriter putting out.
Well, nothing quite so gothic. But look, in terms of social media, I guess a lot of people have to create social media to build up, I guess, the sort of things that my imagination has naturally built up for me through my career, and that's some sort of alternate other. I think for so many people, social media is the face they present to the world. It's usually not the truth of them. The thing for me is, I guess, for 35 years, I've had other places I can go to. Either I'm going to work through my psychosis, or find a place of relief, or find a happiness that I mightn't have in my own world, or find a darkness that I would be wary of exploring in the real world for fear of being antisocial. So I don't feel the need for those places that others perhaps do with social media, and good luck to them. It's just that to me they are redundant. I've sort of had them for 35 years in my own private way, so why go out there and do it in public? Plus I'm actually quite a private. Look, I'll chat till the cows come home, but all my friends would tell you, if I can go to a dinner party of 3 or 4 people and be the life of the party. I'm really bad on social competition. If I go into a room and the numbers start clocking up over 7, 8, 9 or 10, by the time you're at 20, I'm the fetal ball in the corner, assuming nobody wants to talk to me. So, that's why, to me, Facebook is that sort of taken to an extremity. So my attitude to Facebook is, who wants to know anyway, but good luck to those who do. I'm not being critical of it,
On that note, I'm going to invite Simon Collins, who's also in England, he and Amy have really helped lift our presence in the world to a higher level with their technical expertise, and using Twitter and Instagram to expand the world of a place to call home. We're coming at it from a different perspective than you as the creator. We want as many people as possible to have the joy of experiencing this wonderful series. So, Simon, say hello to Bevan.
Hello, Bevan.
Simon, thank you for your technical spreading of the word. It's good on you.
Yes, I enjoy that. I think it's important that we do spread the word. I mean, it's most of the people, interestingly, in England have we've asked how they got into the program, and I think almost everyone said we discovered it by chance. I mean, it's shown in the afternoons, 2:30, 3:00 in the afternoons. They discovered it by chance and became hooked. It's not promoted by the BBC very much at all, and really, we think it should have a late night evening slot on the network. Then more people would get it, and I think, I mean, it'd be great if it had a bigger following here, because which is unfortunately because it's not promoted and it's tucked away, but it's happening. I think
it's happened with a lot of Australia. A lot of my shows seem to have, like All Saints and Winners and Losers, and I think that was and Packed to the Rafters have, and most have played over there, but in afternoon slots, and it's just nice to know that that as somebody who's been around the industry for as long as I have, at a point where you never thought of your shows playing overseas at all, the fact that it does get to a slot where hopefully people can hear of it and then it can spread light through you guys is a novelty in itself. So it would be lovely, as you say, to go further, but that in itself is warming enough at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I had a couple of questions for you. You've actually answered quite a lot of it. A lot of it was to do with season 3, but I've scribbled a few notes down, and I've got my question really. Basically, when the program was renewed for season 3, I mean, everyone in Australia, I know the cast and the viewers were ecstatic, and nothing I'm about to say takes anything away from that. Yeah. But some of the comments we've had in our group, and something I've noticed myself, is that we did notice in season 3 there was a shift in the pace of the drama, of the storylines, a different feel to it. Everything seemed to be happening a bit quicker. For example, George proposed to Regina, I think in episode 8 or something like that, about halfway through the episode. By the end of the episode, they were married. I think, just to give that for an example, I mean, there's some excellent episodes, such as the Mourner's Curse that you were talking about before. I mean, that was, and the research that went into that. But I think the characterizations, when things are going so fast, sometimes the characterization of the characters, like say Elizabeth and Samantha, Elizabeth and Sarah, they're both very strong personalities, and some of that characterization can be lost when it goes too fast.
Well, I said to Susan when she took over, and I'd worked with Susan on All Saints. I have a very specific, I guess every creative person does, has their own very specific tone of their creativity. You pick up a book by a certain novelist. Overall, you can often, by one novelist and another, they're very, very different. I said to Susan when she took over, because my style is quite specific to myself, I said, don't try and mimic me. Take it and do your own riff on it. And I think that was very, very important. Because I said, if you try and mimic me, you'll just end up with not such good me as you might end up by coming in and embracing it as your own, and that is good you. And I think maybe what you noticed was that it was perhaps more tonally and rhythmically what felt right within her methodology, and she came in and did a sterling job, and under difficult circumstances. It's very, very difficult to come and take over a show, that's sort of been run very with a very sort of strong influence from I hope to think benign megalomaniac like me, and and so she came in and she did a marvelous job, and under those circumstances, and I think it was important that and some of those differences I think you noticed are probably to do with each creator has their own different feelings of rhythm and pacing, and so you probably just noticed that which you'd got used to in terms of my pacings, and I think you'll probably see when you come to season 4, that it returns to my rhythms and pacings. But it's only, I think it's as it should be, because if Susan had come in and tried to mimic me, I think that you would have felt even, you would have felt probably less comfortable with it, because it would have been like, somebody, trying to pretend to be me rather than being themselves as a creator within the world that existed. I'll be interested to see how, in terms of pacing, how people feel about 4, in as much as one thing I will say about 4 is, what I'm interested in is not only, as I said, exploring certain facets of that era. I'm interested in dealing with certain entertainment styles that were in that era. So if you do watch the films of Douglas Sirk, or you do watch some of those movies, that the movies of the 50s were not scared of swelling orchestras and rich performances and people chewing the scenery and embracing richness of melodrama. In 4, because we've gone into 1954, another form that was very popular at that point was film noir. And I think you'll notice when you come into 4 that we actually go into some storyline tropes that really mimic the film noir tropes of that time. And I find that stylistically, for me, interesting. So I suppose that's a way of sort of saying, like, that just as it would have been odd, I think, if you'd not noticed differences, because each individual person has to bring. You can't bring your passion unless you bring yourself. So,
of course,
it's really interesting. I don't know, some of the stuff that Susan did that you really liked. You mightn't have got it as rich from me. It was really interesting for me to watch stuff, and I'd watch it, and there'd be some stuff I'd watch that, in all honesty, I'd look and go, I think probably would have done that bit better. And there was other stuff I'd watch and I'd go, oh, bloody hell, she pulled that off better than I would have. It's nothing that one never likes to admit stuff like that. But, you have to be generous. But, it's really interesting. I'll be interested to see how people feel about the sort of the rhythms that I set in 4. One thing I do like to do, though, and I think that I suggested that she not try, because I'm good at it, but you have to be, I don't know, I think you can get tripped up on it, is that thing of plot reversals, where one of the nicest compliments I got on the show was somebody said, and I can't remember where it was, it's a show where you think you know where it's going all the time, and it never does, but when it gets there, it's exactly where you think it should have gone in the first place. And that is that it does twist back on itself. It does actually surprise you. You think you know where it's going, and for example, just a small thing in episode 4. Once again, it's not a spoiler, so I don't mind saying it. The actual character choice, the action choice that Elizabeth makes in episode 4, no one is going to see it come until it happens. I defy anybody in episode 1 to predict what Elizabeth does in episode 4. I could bet $1 million on. I know that my $1 million would be safe, but when it happens, it's absolutely. You cannot imagine the action being anything other than what it was. And as I say, I think people will be leaping to their feet, screaming "hooray!" And so, I think that it's important. Even if I left at the end of 4 and somebody came in season 5, I think that you, as fans of the show, would then also have to embrace the show and adjust your expectations of the rhythms of the show to their rhythms, because that's the only way I think a creator can be true. Now, of course, if somebody suddenly came in and turned it on its head, then I think fans would have a right to be disappointed. But I think it's interesting. I think in that light, I think you might find it interesting to go back and revisit season 3 and do a bit of analysis and see, what the points might be where I would have gone, I think I might have done that bit different. What the points might have been where I tipped my hat to Susan, went, good on you, that's better than I would have done it, sort of thing.
Bevan, you have to be very careful. You're going to give writers a really good name. You support your coworkers. You support the people that you choose to write with you. this is so, as a writer myself who spent a long time in Hollywood, I wrote Young and the Restless, I did a lot of different
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
The support and encouragement of other writers is why, even though there were some people who had questions about season 3, you really did leave people in charge who really understood. They might have made different choices than you would have made, but they really kept the richness and the interest of these wonderful characters that you created. So
Well,
kudos
yeah,
to
yeah.
you.
It's you have to. I mean, um, I think to not support in that way or to not be encouraging in that way is we can all fall prey to our own self-regard or something. But you know, I am somebody who has tried as much as possible to in an industry where you can lose your humility. I've tried as much as possible to retain it because I think, apart from anything else, one is a better writer if one actually brings humility to the creative process as well. And I think one of the ways of retaining your humility is retaining respect and appreciation for those who you work with. And at the moment, I'm season 4. I'm working with the wondrous Catherine Thompson. Now, Catherine and I have written this. Just the two of us have written the season between us. Just 2 writers for the whole season. I've actually written 9 of the scripts, and she's written 3, and she's actually running it in house. But you know, those are the joys. You know, the ability to hand over to Susan on 3, and to know that in handing it over to Susan, I was handing it over to an old comrade and someone I'd actually beavered away at the coalface with for many years on a show called All Saints, and I knew that whatever happened would bring professional zeal and expertise to it. Now, the minute you actually lose that joy in your compatriots' efforts, then I think that you somehow you lose part of your creative humanity, and I just don't want to do that. You know what I mean? So I thrill to those people I work with around me. Sometimes, of course, it can be frustrating if people don't get it. You know, often you can see something really, really clearly, and somebody you're working with can't see it as clearly as you, and that can be frustrating. But you know, one does try and fight that frustration and try and understand why that communication isn't happening. But I hope I yeah, look, I guess I've had times in my career where I've been more self-regarding and I haven't liked myself in retrospect for those periods, and so I think now I do try and be as open and giving and appreciative of those around me, because we're only as good in a collaborative medium like screen. We're only as good often as those people who come on board and mind meld with us. Yes.
Bevan, you've been so great about sharing your time with us. And before we let you go, you know,
Yeah.
when I posted that we were going to do a live chat with you, I got so many people posting questions, sending emails about what questions they would pose to you. So before we let you go, I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions.
Sure. Okay.
As someone who knows about hypocrisy and racism and homophobia and prejudice and all these other elements that are so important to good drama, what are you watching when you're sitting in your living room with your loved ones, friends, and you're watching television, and there's Netflix and chill, or let's turn on the TV and see what's on? What are you watching, and why do you like these particular programs?
Okay, I think my very favourite television show ever is a French television show called Engrenage. The English title is Spiral. There's been 5 seasons of it. I watch it with glowing admiration, not only for the fact that it's utterly riveting, but also for the fact that I could no more write a police show than fly over the moon. So I'm watching the extraordinary achievement of people who are doing something that I wish I could, but I know I don't have the creative wherewithal to pull off. But if I did have the creative wherewithal to pull off, I just wish Spiral is a show that, or Engrenage is a show that, watch it. If you haven't seen it, BBC have it on DVD. Spiral, stunning. The American show that I like is House of Lies, because I just love watching people who are functional political creatures and make Regina look like a kindergarten student. I love the sheer viciousness and venality of that show, because I think it speaks a truth of the world that is unpalatable, but we are in a world that's run by people who have that degree of self-regard and as those characters. So I love that. I love the fact they embrace that they actually don't go, let's make him likable. They somehow or other make the central character likable without actually denying the truth of his self-regard and venality, and equally his wife. And we all have to have a guilty pleasure, and I stand up with pride and admit mine, because if we're going to have a guilty pleasure, at least not be guilty about it. I'm absolutely a huge fan of the Vampire Diaries. And I don't care what anyone says. I flagrantly throw it in your face and go and challenge you to laugh at it. I just love it. It's what I love about the Vampire Diaries is they keep plotting themselves in, they keep painting themselves into plot corners, and then with just complete outrageous bravura and chutzpah, they completely sort of like smash their way out of plot corners they've painted themselves into. So I just love the plotting bravura of that. And so those, and there are lots of others, but those probably are the ones I would highlight.
Excellent. I have one more question, but
yes.
I just want Simon to chime in for one quick minute before we close.
Yep.
Go ahead, Simon.
Yes, hello again, Bevan. Yeah, just a couple of things, picking up on what you said, a couple of points to make. First thing, I mean, when you said that you were quite offended when somebody said the show was shallow and they hadn't seen it, I mean, it's anything but that, which is shown by the discussions we have in our group about the issues raised. I mean, one thing with me, I find it takes me out of my comfort zone in some ways. A couple of things, I mean, say the storyline of Sarah and Renee. I mean, I know me personally, I personally wanted Sarah and George to be together. I mean, I think that's that, and then obviously they couldn't be, and I knew there's no way, as long as Renee was there was no way Sarah would ever go back to George. So when he died, I mean, I felt that was coming, but it was almost, I was torn between, almost when he died, it was bittersweet, because I'm thinking now there might be a chance for this romance with George again, but also how sad, how devastating for Sarah to lose him again, to lose Renee again. And also with Olivia and James. I mean, there's obviously James was unhappy in the relationship for obvious reasons. Neither of them was satisfied. I think it was shown when Olivia had the affair with the artist. She was being satisfied sexually in a way that she could never get with James, and James obviously was being satisfied, with the doctor and Henry and the doctor in ways he could never be satisfied. And part of me really wanted it to be some miraculous way that Olivia and James could make it work, because I think they seemed genuinely in love and cared for each other, and it could have worked so well if things had been different. I mean, so that's, it tears you in a way, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but the thing I sort of Olivia and James are based upon a very personal situation for me, and that is, I think you get a lot of situations, whether it between man and woman, or woman or man and man, you get a lot of situations in life where two people should be together and they still love each other, but circumstance creates a situation where they cannot be traditionally together, because we're told, and so do we stay together in a relationship where perhaps physical desire has gone with time? Do we stay together for affection and love, or do we go and try and find a relationship that still has physical desire within it? I mean, I think that that is, for example, the situation. See, I think that I knew a couple that were James and Olivia. And they were so in love. It was a couple where the woman had found quite late on in the relationship that the man had for decades had dalliances with men behind her back. And, the question there was, do I love this person enough now, still, given all these things, to, what do we have by embracing this new view of what might be? And so, I guess I like to explore those more complex views than just two people who come together for this and stay together because of such and such. And to me, that's the interesting complexities of life that I hope are reflected in the storytelling. It's why, as I say, I fought very much to have her embrace Renee when he came back, rather than a lot of people saying to me, no, of course the husband comes back and she'd stay with George. And I just said, no, she wouldn't. She simply would not. That's not character. So to me, those are the things that make the storytelling interesting and complex and make the audience not necessarily know where it's going to go, because that's what I think hopefully makes people think, where is season 4 going to go? Because I think it does go to a lot of places that they won't expect. By embracing the idea that people can make more complex choices emotionally than maybe just the traditional way.
Thank you. Yeah, and if I can mention one more thing very quickly, I was a huge fan of Sons and Daughters in the 80s, which I know were heavily involved with. I've actually spoke to you by email about 10 years ago and asked you a few questions about it through Dan Foster that ran the Home and Away group. I was a moderator there, and Dan kindly forwarded some questions to you, and you gave me some great answers to that. And thank you for that. First time I get to thank you for that. But one thing I've noticed, me personally, that Elizabeth, the character of Elizabeth and the character of Regina, in both of those characters, I see elements of the Patricia, the Pat the Rat character. I mean, I see it in particular with Elizabeth, acting for the greater good. They believe they're doing the right thing for the family. And with Regina, in some ways, the things she does, I mean, not that you have sympathy so much with her, but the things she does, I can see they're the sort of things she would have done, to get her own way. I mean,
I would say that's quite accurate. I think both characters, in a way, are a sort of I like to think, and it's not putting down Sons and Daughters, because it was a show that I did a lot of my early training on, and it's a show that I have a lot to thank for, because the person I have become creatively is a lot to do with my mentorship on that show by a man called Don Batty and by a man called Reg Watson, who created the show. So a lot of what I am is thanks to those men and what they helped mould of me back in the days with that show. And I would say that, you were quite accurate in seeing the genesis of both those characters to a certain extent back there. Yeah, your perceptions are quite accurate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, was it subconsciously or any conscious link there when you were creating the characters at all, or is it just coincidence, you think, or?
Oh no, I think I even said in some story meetings, Elizabeth's just like Patricia was back in Sons and Daughters. That back on Sons, everything is done for the good of the family, and it was because that is what ultimately makes the character redeemable. One of the reasons that Regina is less redeemable than Elizabeth is Elizabeth does for the good of the family. Regina does for the good of Regina.
Yes, totally.
And that's the difference between the two women, and that's the difference that I think that the more extreme actions of the Pat the Rat character in Sons and Daughters are probably expressed in some of the more outrageous actions of Regina, but the psychological bedding of the Pat the Rat character exists in Elizabeth.
Right, thank you. I think that's why, like Amy said and I said, we were very interested to see some of the backstory of Regina as to why she acts this way. Then maybe we can, whatever they do, you don't totally lose sympathy with the character if you can understand the reason behind it, whether it's right or wrong. And I think with Regina, we don't, as an audience, we don't know much of her backstory. And it's another reason we can't, you can't.
I can't remember the episode. I can't remember the episode it was in, but there's an episode where she basically does give a bit of a talk about her sister and that sort of thing. And although we haven't got backstory is a difficult one because you go into it too much, you sort of scenes sort of bogs down in this sort of somewhat expository sort of like let's fill in the gaps thing. I've hinted at it a bit, and the thing to me is, but at the end of the day, the difference between Elizabeth and Regina is Elizabeth is a decent woman who just basically has some very entrenched values, and Regina's a psychopath. And one of the things about real psychopaths, and it's why, as I say, I based her on this particular woman, is that they are incredibly plausible, but they're also really cold, unempathetic, self-regarding, and there's not a lot of rationale to them other than they are utterly self-centered. And you can talk about them having bad potty training, but at the end of the day, they're still just basically bad people. I think about Hitler. You can talk about Hitler till the cows come home, and what might have turned him into from the funny little corporal painting postcards in Vienna through to the monster in the bunker in Berlin. But at the end of the day, there's no doubt that there are probably people in the Third Reich where you might have understood their psychology more. But at the end of the day, you just have to say about him, he was a bad bugger. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So that's the difference between Elizabeth and Regina. She's not a good person. Anyway, that's that. Yep.
Yes, thanks very much, Bevan. Thank you.
Cool.
Simon loves to make fun of Regina. You should see if you had Twitter, you would know how much he likes to make fun of her.
Look, the thing I love about Jenny, and Jenny is she's the most gorgeous woman. She's the most lovely person. And the thing I adore about Jenny is she takes Regina by the throat and she just basically nails it. She isn't scared of the fact that, and it's true, some people in life just do bad stuff. And you can make all the excuses in the world, but there are people in life who just do bad stuff more than other people where you might say their bad stuff is motivated. And she's a bad stuff person. And I think sometimes by too much trying to motivate the bad stuff in a character like Regina, you sort of leach the drama out of it. And so let's just say, and Jenny embraces it in the same way I do. It's like, let's just go for it, darling. And she does. She just loves it.
She's marvelous. Bevan, before we let you go, first I want to thank you on behalf not just of those of us who were fortunate enough to chat with you tonight, but for the 850 people at least who are going to get in a few hours the opportunity to listen to our discussion. You are such a fan favorite. We love you, and we don't just love you because you've created a great show. We love you because you have been able to maintain a consistency and, yes, an unpredictable. There's certainly an element of things that are unpredictable, but you created a soul for this show that inevitably stays true to itself. And we love you for that. So on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you. And I want to ask you just one more question before we say goodbye.
Yes.
I'm not big on spoilers because if you tell me what's going to happen, I don't have anything to look forward to. Yeah. But I do want to ask you, can you give us a little bit of what we can look forward to?
It will be unexpected. Let me just say this. The opening scene of season 4 is a scene in which you'll sit there and you'll go, what? And then it reverses on itself. And I sort of state in that opening scene my philosophy for the season, and that is present what the audience thinks they're seeing and then let them see what they're seeing. And what I've tried to do in season 4 is do a lot of having you all think you know where it's going and it doesn't go there at all, and it gives you the thrill of going, oh gosh. I've set out to surprise a lot. I've set out to hopefully delight in some of its plot reversals, but equally I've set out, I think, to hopefully do it in a way that there is a deep emotional connection with the characters at the same time. So really drive the plot along and have quite a twisting and turning narrative that surprises and delights, but equally so at the same time beds it into a very strong emotional grounding behind that. I felt, to be honest, that having been left with the legacy of Sarah taking that drink at the end of season 3, let's just say the whole tone of what happens in season 4 came out of my solution to what comes of that final image of her taking that drink, and I don't think any of you will guess what it is.
That's what makes it so much fun to look forward
There
to
you
next
go.
season.
So that's not a spoiler. That's a titillator. I call that a titillator.
Oh,
Indeed.
And all I can say is to those fans out there, and to you guys too, as I sit in my dotage on the veranda of the Shady Glades home for the clapped out writer, rocking in my rocking chair, the fact that one, I'm proud of my body and my work, but the fact that this one particular show has touched people in this way and has made people extend past the show into discussions of various prejudices and stuff. We all, in our own little way, hope that we touch the world and leave even a minor fingerprint there. And on the veranda of the Shady Glades home for the clapped out writer, thank you very much for helping me feel that a vaguest fingerprint might have been left by this show. So thank you.
Oh, Bevan, we so appreciate your wonderful hard work. We are so enjoying it. Not just the people in Australia, but people all over the world are so delighted by the characters and the brilliant dialogue and the sweeping scenery and the just marvelous series that you've created for us. So thank you on behalf of everyone. We hope that you'll come back and do this again after season 4, hopefully before we have a season 5, and we can hash over this again. But thank you so much on behalf of everyone.
I'll come back for season 4, and somebody will probably say to me, "What do you mean? Nobody had guessed what was going to come after the cliffhanger of 3? I knew." And I'll go, "What?" No, look, I'd be very thrilled to know what people think after season 4 and to chat about it.
We will let you know.
Okay.
For sure. Thank you
Thank
again.
you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
It's been lovely talking to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Oh, you know what? You guys were great. This was a great conversation. I'm so proud of all of you. And I'm going to see if David, David, can you put on your microphone?
Okay, I'm going to sign off.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. I chose great chatters tonight.
Good night.
Really delivered. David, are you